Lunch service began, Elara Langford was already inside. She wore a worn white blouse, soft from too many washes, a plain black skirt. Her light brown hair was tied neatly back in a bun, not because someone told her to, because her grandmother had taught her that tidiness was a form of respect. She moved quietly between the linen-draped tables, wiping each surface with methodical care. Left to right, edge to center, then fold the cloth and do it again. Nobody gave her a second glance. She was background, furniture that moved. That was exactly what she wanted. There was a faint scar on her wrist, pale and thin, easy to miss unless you were looking closely. She never talked about it. It was a remnant from a childhood that hadn't been gentle, from a mother who had been looked down on her entire life, for being poor, for being plain, for never being considered quite enough. Elara had grown up watching that slow erosion, the way her mother flinched when certain people spoke to her, the way she made herself small in rooms where she felt unwelcome. She had promised herself a long time ago she would understand those rooms from the inside. So here she was, 2 weeks into her assignment, hidden in plain sight, gathering information, watching the Gold Coast branch operate from the ground up, not from a corner office. From the side station where the water pitchers lived and the servers folded napkins before the sun came up, her grandfather, Theodore Langford, 75 years old, silver-haired, eyes sharp enough to read a balance sheet from across a boardroom. He had been receiving troubling reports from this branch for months. Staff turnover so high it puzzled the HR department. Accounting irregularities that looked like rounding errors, until you looked again. He needed someone he trusted completely, someone no one would recognize. He needed Elara. She had agreed without hesitating. She held a degree in hospitality management, had spent 4 years abroad, training under a renowned chef, learning the trade the old-fashioned way, tableside service, kitchen logistics, wine pairing, the full architecture of what makes a great restaurant actually work. She was more qualified to evaluate this branch than most people in the corporate office, but none of that was visible. None of it was on her name tag. Her name tag said one word: Elara. The morning rush built slowly. Servers arrived in clusters, hanging coats, checking phones. The kitchen smelled of clarified butter and fresh thyme. A busboy knocked a stack of bread plates and winced, already bracing. Then Victor Harlan walked in. He was tall, impeccably dressed, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 2 months of Elara's wages, a white pocket square angled just so, cologne that arrived a full 3 seconds before he did. He had the kind of smile that worked beautifully on important guests, warm, practiced, perfectly calibrated, the kind of smile that is really a calculation. The servers straightened when they heard his footsteps. Not from admiration, from the particular alertness that people develop when they have learned that stillness is safer than being noticed. Victor swept his gaze across the dining room. It landed on Elara at table 7. He looked at her the way certain people look at things they've already decided are beneath them. A slow, dismissive sweep, top to bottom, as if confirming something he already knew. Then he said something to the assistant manager beside him, something low and contemptuous, in a foreign language, with a smirk that told her he believed she could not understand a single word. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about all of it. Elara lowered her eyes, tightened her fingers around the serving tray, felt the old familiar ache bloom behind her ribs, the one that had been there since childhood, the one that showed up whenever someone decided she wasn't worth basic human decency. She did not react, did not move, did not give him a single thing, but she filed every word away, carefully, the way you tuck a receipt into a wallet, knowing you'll need it later. And somewhere across the city, in a boardroom on the 42nd floor of a Michigan Avenue high-rise, her grandfather's phone screen was already lit up with her name. Here is something most people don't tell you about cruelty in a fine dining restaurant. It's rarely loud. It does not announce itself. It arrives in the form of a sigh when you refill a water glass half a second too late. A slow, contemptuous once-over before a shift briefing. A comment made just quietly enough that you could technically pretend you hadn't heard it, but you had. You always had. Victor Harlan had perfected this particular art over 15 years, and for 2 weeks. Elara watched him practice it. By day, Victor was magnetic, effortlessly charming with the regulars who arrived in black cars and ordered the tasting menu. He remembered their anniversaries, their wine preferences, the names of their grandchildren. He made guests feel like royalty. And in return, the Langford Gold Coast branch held a sterling reputation, a top rating in the city's most respected dining guide, glowing reviews across every platform, a reservation waiting list stretching 6 weeks on weekends. But the moment the last VIP table turned its attention inward, Victor became someone else entirely. He had a particular target for his worst behavior: anyone who could not fight back. Newer employees, the quieter ones, the ones who needed the job badly enough to absorb what he handed them without complaint. Elara watched, said nothing, and every evening, when she returned to her small apartment on North Clark Street, she sat at the table by the window with a cup of chamomile tea that kept going cold because she kept forgetting to drink it, and she wrote everything down. She kept a small notebook, the spiral-bound kind you can get for $1.19 at Walgreens, with a faded blue cover that reminded her of the kitchen calendar her grandmother used to keep. The one covered in neat, careful handwriting. Every appointment and recipe recorded as if each one mattered. In her notebook, Elara recorded dates, times, names, and specific amounts. Because here is what she had uncovered, quietly and methodically, over 14 days. Victor Harlan was stealing from the staff. Not in ways that were easy to spot at first glance. The tip pooling reports showed small discrepancies, $10 here, $15 there. The kind that look like rounding errors unless you know exactly what the correct numbers should be. Elara knew the Langford corporate tip distribution standards by heart. She had reviewed every policy document before her assignment. These numbers did not match, and the overtime records were worse. 3 servers, including a young woman named Mia, had clocked out on paper at 9 p.m. for the past several Saturdays. But Elara had been there until 11. She had watched them keep working. She had folded napkins beside them under the fluorescent light of the back prep area, and none of those extra hours appeared anywhere in the official logs. Victor was keeping the difference every night. Elara added the new entries to her little blue notebook and set it beside her cold chamomile tea. She was building a case. She just needed a little more time. Mia was 22 years old and looked younger. She had the kind of face that made you want to offer her a glass of sweet tea and ask if she needed help carrying something. Wide, earnest eyes, quick and careful hands, a shy smile that appeared briefly and then retreated, as if it wasn't quite sure it had permission to stay. She had been at the Gold Coast branch for 3 months. She worked harder than almost anyone on the floor, and Victor had singled her out from her very first week. It came to a head on a Thursday evening. A wine glass, one of the tall, thin-stemmed ones, slipped from Mia's fingers as she cleared a recently vacated table. It caught the edge of a chair on the way down. The sound was clear and sharp in the quiet dining room. Victor crossed the room in moments. He did not raise his voice where guests could hear. He spoke close and quietly, his words aimed just at Mia. But Elara, standing 6 feet away, restocking the side station, caught every syllable. He told her the broken glass was coming out of her wages, that she was costing him more than she was worth, that if she could not handle basic table service, she had no business being there at all. Mia nodded. Her face had gone the color of the white tablecloth. She bent to pick up the broken glass with her bare hands. "Use the napkin," Elara said quietly. She handed one over. Victor looked at Elara then. A slow, measuring look. Not quite suspicion, not quite curiosity, more like a cat deciding whether something new in the room was worth paying attention to. "Back to work," he said pleasantly, in English, and smiled his beautiful, calibrated smile. An hour later, Elara went looking for Mia. She found her in the walk-in cooler, standing between the shelves of portioned proteins and the tall, narrow stock containers, arms wrapped around herself, crying the kind of tears that come when you have been holding them in for far too long. Quiet, exhausted, helpless. The cold in there was sharp. The kind that gets into your bones the way a hard winter morning does when you step outside in your slippers and the frost is still on the grass. Elara stepped inside and let the heavy door close behind her. She did not speak right away. She had learned from her grandmother that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply be present. Just close, without filling the silence. After a long moment, Mia looked up. "I think I'm going to quit." Her voice was unsteady, barely there. "He's been taking part of my tips for 3 months. When I asked about it, he told me I had miscounted. And now—" She stopped, steadied herself. "Now he's telling people around the restaurant that I earn extra money by being overly friendly with customers." She could barely finish the sentence. "None of it is true." Elara stood very still. She thought of her mother. She thought of a specific afternoon when she was 9 years old, sitting on the steps of someone else's house, listening to a woman speak to her mother as though she were nothing. She thought of the way her mother had nodded and gathered her coat and walked back out into the rain without a single word to defend herself. She thought, "Not again. Not if I can stop it." She put her arm around Mia's shoulders. "Don't quit," she said. "Don't give him that." Mia shuddered. "We are going to change this," Elara said. "I promise you." She meant it as more than comfort. She meant it as a decision, a line drawn quietly in the cold air of a restaurant storage room with nobody watching. She did not tell Mia who she was. Not yet. That moment required exactly the right circumstances, and those circumstances were closer than either of them knew. 3 days later, a name appeared on the reservation system that made Victor Harlan visibly stand taller the moment he saw it. James Calloway, dining critic for the Chicago Tribune's Weekend Culture section, published in 3 national food journals, a man whose reviews had quietly ended careers and launched them. Victor circled the name on the printout with his gold pen. And then, at the morning briefing, he looked directly at Elara. His smile shifted, just slightly, the way a door shifts when a draft finds its way under it. What he had planned for her would turn out to be the biggest mistake of his career. But neither of them knew that yet. The morning of James Calloway's reservation, Victor called Elara into his office. It was a small room just off the main corridor, mahogany desk, a framed industry commendation on the wall, a window that faced the back alley rather than the lake. The kind of room designed to remind you of the hierarchy the moment you stepped through the door. He told her she would be assigned to serve Mr. Calloway's table that evening. There was no warmth in the announcement. No vote of confidence. He said it the way you say something when you are already picturing it going wrong. When failure, not success, is what you're counting on. Then he leaned back in his chair and spoke with the particular satisfaction of someone who believes they hold all the cards. He told her, in a low, unhurried voice, that if she embarrassed this restaurant in front of James Calloway, he would make certain she never found work in any dining room in Chicago again, that he had the connections to ensure it, that she was, and here he paused to let the words land, entirely replaceable. In fact, he said, she had always been a placeholder, a body filling space while he waited for a competent hire. He studied her face as he spoke, waiting for the flinch, the trembling lip, the quick nod of someone who has accepted that this is simply how things are. Elara looked at him steadily. "Understood, Mr. Harlan," she said. "I'll take excellent care of Mr. Calloway." She turned and walked out. Behind her, she heard him exhale, a short, dissatisfied sound, like a man who had been cheated out of the reaction he wanted. That uncertainty was exactly where she needed him. James Calloway arrived at 7:15. He was in his mid-50s, wire-rimmed glasses, a navy blazer, no visible notebook, but eyes that moved constantly and cataloged everything. Light levels, the distance between tables, the angle of a server's approach. He was accompanied by a quietly elegant woman in a cream blazer who studied the menu with the focused attention of someone who does this professionally. Calloway was not there to be impressed. He was there to evaluate. Elara approached the table, introduced herself, and presented the menus with the specificity that separates genuine training from someone reciting a script. She described the evening's featured dishes not by reading from a list, but by explaining them. The provenance of the duck, the particular growing region of the Burgundy, the reason the kitchen was preparing one dish tableside tonight, and why that mattered. Calloway looked up from the menu. "Tableside," he said. "A duck press preparation," Elara said. "A 19th century French technique. The bird is roasted, then pressed to extract the cooking juices, which are combined with a spirit and reduced into a sauce right here at the table. The entire process happens in front of you. It is rarely done well anymore because it requires a great deal of precision." A pause. "I've written about that preparation," Calloway said. "I've never actually seen it done in person." "Then let me show you," Elara said simply. She did not look toward the kitchen, did not glance toward Victor, who had materialized near the host stand and was watching with the expression of a man who has set a trap and is now waiting for the spring. She simply began. What happened at table 12 over the next 35 minutes was, by any professional measure, extraordinary. Elara worked with the focused precision of someone who had practiced this preparation dozens of times, which she had, under exacting supervision. Learning to press the bird cleanly, to deglaze the pan at exactly the right moment, to let the cognac flame rise and fall while keeping the sauce moving at the correct temperature. She explained each step as she worked, not performing, not lecturing, but speaking the way you talk to someone who genuinely wants to understand something. She explained the chemistry of why the initial sear created depth in the sauce. She suggested that Calloway try a small taste before adding salt. and told him exactly why the tannins in his glass would interact differently with the dish as the plate warmed. Calloway's wife set down her glass and leaned forward. Calloway himself had stopped pretending to be neutral. Victor moved closer to the table. Elara felt him, a deliberate presence crowding the edge of the space. She understood what he was doing. He was waiting for the moment when his interference might tip something off balance. He leaned in toward her and spoke quietly, in the same low foreign tone he had used all week. Confident the words would mean nothing to her, he told her she was an embarrassment, that a trained professional would never have volunteered for a preparation this complicated, that when this went wrong, and it would go wrong, she would have no one to blame but herself. He straightened up and smiled at the table. The warm, calibrated smile. Gracious host. Nothing to see here. Calloway glanced between them. Elara set down the pressing tool with a quiet, composed click. And then she spoke, in English, clear, unhurried, addressed to the table but pitched so that everyone nearby could hear. She said, "I want to make sure I've been fully transparent with you this evening. What Mr. Harlan just said to me was not a comment on the food or the service. It was a personal remark. I won't repeat it, but I want you to know that what you're seeing tonight is the standard this restaurant was built to offer. And that standard belongs to the people who work here, not to one title above the floor." The table was completely silent. Calloway's wife looked at Victor. The look said everything. Then Elara turned back to the duck, finished the sauce, plated the dish with clean, practiced hands, stepped back. Calloway picked up his fork, tasted it. He set the fork down, removed his glasses, placed them on the tablecloth with the deliberate care of a man who is about to say something he means. "That," he said, "is the truest thing I have experienced in a fine dining room in 3 years." He looked at Elara directly. "That is hospitality. Not the room, not the wine list. You." His wife began to applaud, softly. Then Calloway joined her. From behind the kitchen door, barely audible above the ambient murmur of the room, came the sound of someone else beginning to clap. Victor's face had gone still. The polished smile had not disappeared exactly. It had simply stopped working, the way a light flickers before it goes out. For the first time in 15 years, in front of the precise audience that mattered most to his professional standing, his carefully constructed image had cracked. Elara looked at him. Without triumph, without anger, with the steady, clear-eyed calm of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment and is ready for what comes next. She said, quietly and in English, "Genuine respect is what creates a lasting reputation, Mr. Harlan. Not expensive suits and not job titles." The applause from behind the kitchen door grew slightly louder, but Victor Harlan had not finished, and what he did next, in front of every guest, every employee, and one very significant camera, would end his career not in a crack, but in a collapse. Pride is a peculiar thing. A small, decent amount of it keeps you standing, but the brittle kind, the kind built not on earned confidence, but on the need to remain above everyone else in the room, that kind shatters. And it always shatters loudest when someone finally stops being afraid of it. Victor spent the remainder of that service in a cold fury. He moved through the dining room with his smile still in place, his pocket square still angled just so. But his jaw was set like a locked door. And the servers could feel the shift. They gave him extra space. They kept their eyes down and spoke to him in shorter sentences than usual, doing the invisible calculation that people who work under volatile authority always do. How bad is it tonight? What is the safest way through? Mia stayed near the back stations. She had learned over 3 months that visibility was not always safe. Elara worked her section calmly, cleared plates, refilled glasses, thanked guests by name. She moved with the quiet steadiness of someone who has nothing to prove and nowhere to hide. That, in the end, was what broke Victor. Not the applause, not Calloway's words, the fact that she was simply not afraid. It happened during the final seating, 8:30. The dining room still 3/4 full, the low candlelight making everything glow warmer than it was. Elara was walking toward the service corridor when Victor stepped directly into her path. For one fraction of a second, she thought it was an accident, a misjudged step. It was not an accident. He grabbed her by the arm, hard. The kind of grip that is not about steadying someone. It is about showing someone they can be moved. And then he turned. Not toward the back corridor where this could be handled privately, but outward, into the center of the dining room, under the chandelier, in front of everyone. His voice, for the first time all evening, was not quiet. "You think you're something special?" The words came out sharp and unsteady, stripped of the charming, professional polish that had served him for 15 years. "You are nothing. You will leave this restaurant tonight, and I will personally guarantee you never set foot in a professional kitchen again. Not in this city, not anywhere." He released her arm and raised his hand. The room went still. That particular, terrible stillness. Like the moment before a summer storm rolls off the lake, when the air pressure drops and even the birds stop. Crystal glasses trembled faintly on their stems. From somewhere near the service station, Mia's voice broke through. "Please, stop!" The elegant, carefully maintained hush of the Langford Gold Coast branch shattered. Guests pushed back from their chairs. A woman near the window pressed her hand to her mouth. The sommelier froze mid-pour. 2 servers near the kitchen door stood completely motionless. Elara did not move. She stood in the center of that room and was aware, with extraordinary, almost detached clarity, of several things at once. Victor's hand, still raised. The room, watching. The scar on her wrist, pale and thin under the chandelier light. And then the memories arrived, not gently. The way memories come when you have been holding them back too long, all at once. A cold rush. Her mother's face on a gray afternoon outside a house that was not theirs. A woman's voice, flat and final. Her mother nodding, gathering her coat, walking back into the rain without a single word in her own defense. This was her darkest moment. She could feel the weight of it pressing down. The old, familiar heaviness that whispered she was not enough, had never been enough, that this was simply how things ended for people like her. For one terrible second, she nearly believed it. Then she breathed. One slow breath. In. Steady. The way her grandmother had taught her when she was 12 years old and overwhelmed by something she could not control. Breath first, then decide. She breathed, and she decided. Her hands were trembling slightly. She did not try to hide them. Composure. She had learned over 27 years is not the absence of feeling. It is the choice to act from your values instead of your fear. She looked at Victor Harlan, past the suit, past the cologne, past the 15 years of practiced performance, and she saw clearly what was underneath. A man who had built his entire sense of authority on the power to make other people feel small. A man who had just run completely out of that power. The large display screen on the north wall of the dining room flickered to life. It was ordinarily used for private event slideshows and anniversary presentations. Tonight, it showed something else entirely. A live video call. The man on the screen was 75 years old, silver-haired, a commanding presence that filled even a video frame the way certain people fill a room without any effort at all. His eyes were sharp, and at this particular moment, they were completely still. Elara Langford. His voice came through the restaurant speaker system with perfect clarity. Victor Harlan. The room had gone so quiet you could hear the candles. The young woman standing in front of you is Elara Langford, my granddaughter. Victor turned toward the screen, slowly. The way a man turns when his body has not yet caught up with the understanding that everything is over. She has been working in this restaurant for the past 3 weeks as part of her preparation to lead the hospitality culture division of the Langford organization. She has been observing, documenting, and protecting the people under your management, while you were dismantling everything this company stands for. The room did not move. Elara stepped forward. Something shifted. Not dramatically, not with announcement. The quiet young woman in the worn white blouse and plain black skirt simply straightened into herself, into who she actually was. She looked at Victor, and then she spoke, calmly, without theatrics, in the unhurried voice of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. You told me I was nothing but cheap decoration, born to scrub floors. One step forward. This decoration has been protecting your restaurant for 3 weeks. Let me tell you what I found. She turned to face the room, the guests, the staff, her grandfather's image on the screen, and she told the truth. All of it. The tip theft, the exact dates, the exact amounts, the names of every employee affected, the overtime hours that disappeared from the official logs while the servers kept working, the deliberate campaign to isolate and discredit Mia, the rumors, the intimidation, the calculated effort to silence a 22-year-old who had done nothing wrong. The repeated violations of Langford's own operational and ethical standards, documented over 14 days in a small blue notebook from Walgreens. Every detail, every incident, every name, one by one. The staff members lowered their heads, not in shame, in relief, the particular, bone-deep relief of hearing the truth spoken out loud by someone who has the power to act on it. Victor's composure crumbled completely. He went to his knees, right there, in the center of the dining room, under the chandelier, in front of the guests and the staff and Elara Langford's unwavering gaze on the screen. He said he was sorry, that he had only been trying to uphold standards, that the pressure of running a flagship location had been. Elara Langford's voice cut through the room like a door closing, and what came next was swift, final, and long overdue. Elara Langford did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. There is a particular kind of authority that does not announce itself. The kind built over decades of genuine consequence, of decisions made and owned, of institutions shaped by real values rather than performance. When Elara spoke, rooms listened the way rooms listen to thunder from a distance. Not from surprise, but from the understanding that something significant is about to arrive. Victor Harlan, effective immediately. You are terminated from Langford European Fine Dining. The announcement settled over the room like something physical. All executive privileges are revoked as of this moment. Every dollar of employee tips withheld over the past 6 months will be fully reimbursed to the affected staff members, with a formal, written acknowledgement from this organization. Beginning tomorrow morning, the Gold Coast branch will undergo a complete operational and ethical review. He paused, just long enough to let the weight of it land. Every standard this company was built on will be reinstated, and every person in that dining room who showed up did their job with honesty and endured what they should never have been asked to endure. They have my personal apology and my respect. 2 security officers entered the dining room. Elara had not seen them come in, but she understood that her grandfather had anticipated this moment. They were courteous, professional, and completely unmovable. Victor was escorted toward the door. He walked the full length of the dining room, past the tables where guests sat watching with an expression that falls somewhere between discomfort and the oldest, most honest kind of human satisfaction. Past the servers he had spent 15 years reducing, one small cruelty at a time. Past the host stand where his framed industry commendations still hung on the wall. At the door, he stopped. He turned back. Old habits. "I was only trying to maintain high standards," he said. The words were quieter now, almost to himself, as though he was still searching for the version of the story that made him the reasonable one. Elara looked at him with the steady, clear-eyed calm she had carried all evening. No anger, no triumph, just the simple truth. "High standards," she said, "should never be built on the suffering of other people." The words did not fill the room the way a shout fills a room. They settled into it, quietly, the way a stone settles to the bottom of still water and stays there. Victor said nothing else. The door closed behind him. 4 seconds of silence, maybe 5. The kind of silence that follows something that cannot be taken back. Then Mia began to clap. It started small, one pair of hands, somewhere near the service station. The sound fragile and uncertain, like a candle being lit in a large, dark room. But it did not stay small. It spread the way warmth spreads from a wood stove on a cold morning. Carlos the busboy, then the sommelier, then 2 servers near the kitchen door, then Denise, the older server who had worked this branch for 6 years and who had slipped Elara a folded piece of paper 3 days ago, containing a handwritten list of Victor's violations, passed over without a single word, because Denise was the kind of woman who knew when the moment was right. Then the rest of the floor staff. Then, unexpectedly, the guests. James Calloway set down his final glass of wine and applauded with the quiet sincerity of a man who understood precisely what he had just witnessed and intended to write about it. Somewhere near the back corridor, someone was crying. More than one someone. Elara stood at the center of it and let it wash over her. Not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter and more lasting. The particular steadiness that comes from having done what needed to be done, at the cost it needed to cost, for the people who needed someone to do it. She was aware of the scar on her wrist, faint, pale, barely visible in the chandelier light. She thought of her mother. She thought, "I hope, wherever you are, you could see this." Then she did the thing that would make people describe her to their families the next morning. The thing they mentioned first, before the confrontation, before the revelation, before any of the extraordinary details of that evening. She asked, very quietly, that her identity be kept from the guests as much as possible for the remainder of the night, so as not to disrupt the dining experience. The assistant manager stared at her. "You just," he started, and then stopped, because there were no words for it. "The guests came here for a good dinner," Elara said simply. "Let's make sure they have one." Several of the servers exchanged glances. The kind of glance that does not require words. The kind that means, this is what it should have always looked like. One of them, a young man named Marcus, who had been with the branch for 8 months and had never, in all that time, volunteered for an extra task, picked up a water pitcher and went back to work. The others followed. The dining room settled back into the rhythm of a professional service. Plates were cleared, dessert menus were offered. The ambient music returned to the level it was meant to be at, and the candlelight kept its warmth, and the crystal caught the light the way it was designed to. From the screen on the north wall, Theodore Langford watched all of it. He did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was different, quieter. The boardroom authority had not left it, but something else had entered, something older and more personal. "You've made me very proud," he said. Elara looked at the screen, at her grandfather's face, the sharp eyes, the silver hair, the expression of a man who has spent 75 years building something and has just seen proof that it will last. She nodded, small, steady, the nod of someone accepting something they have waited a long time to hear. But the evening was not quite over, and what Elara chose to do in the quiet hour after the last guest left, the choice no one in that restaurant had anticipated, was the most important moment of all. There is a particular kind of quiet that follows a real storm. Not the ordinary silence of an empty room, but the kind that has earned itself. The kind where the air feels different, washed clean. The kind where you step outside after the worst of it has passed, and the world looks exactly as it always did, except you are seeing it differently, because you made it through something. That was the Gold Coast branch at 10:47 on a Thursday evening in October. The last guest had gathered their coat and gone. The dining room had the specific emptiness of a space that has held too much feeling in too short a time. Chairs slightly askew, a pressed napkin still on the floor near table 12, candle votives burned down to their last half-inch of light. Elara stood at the edge of it. There was a corner office waiting for her, a chair with her family name on it. Effectively, every transition her grandfather had planned, every arrangement that was now hers to step into. She looked at the dining room, and she tied on her apron. The staff watched her come back to the floor. For a moment, no one moved. They were not quite sure what they were seeing, whether it was real, whether it was some kind of test. She picked up a bussing cloth and began straightening the nearest table. After a moment, Mia came and stood beside her, said nothing, picked up a cloth of her own, then Carlos, then the sommelier, then Denise, who moved with the unhurried steadiness of a woman who has seen enough in her years to know when something matters and when it does not. And who had decided that this mattered? They worked together in the comfortable quiet of people who have been through something and do not need to talk about it yet. The kind of quiet that feels. If you have ever sat on a porch at the end of a long, hard day with someone you trust, maybe your husband before he was gone, or a neighbor named Betty while the sprinklers ran in the yard next door, like its own form of conversation. At some point, Elara looked up at the small group gathered around her. Mia, Carlos, Denise, Marcus, the others. Tired faces, aprons wrinkled from the long shift, eyes that still carried the heaviness of the evening, but something else now, too. something beginning to lift. She spoke the way you talk to people you have worked beside in a cold prep kitchen at midnight when everyone is exhausted and something real has just happened. Not a speech, just words. "The real foundation of a restaurant," she said, "is the honest people inside it. Not the rating, not the title on the door. The people who show up every day and do the work with care." She paused. Real class has nothing to do with a job title or an expensive suit. It comes from respect, from being willing to understand someone else's experience. That is what this place is going to be, going forward. That is what it was always supposed to be. Mia's face crumpled. She crossed the room and put her arms around Elara, the way you hold on to someone when words are not sufficient. When what you mean is, "I did not know anyone was coming, and then you came. You saved me," she whispered. Elara held on. She felt the particular ache of it, the kind of gratitude that also carries grief inside it, because it means someone needed saving in the first place. She thought of her mother. She hoped, somewhere, her mother could feel this moment too. On the display screen, which no one had turned off, Theodore Langford was still there. He had stayed through all of it. The cleanup, the quiet conversations, the slow return to something that felt like safety. Watching his granddaughter the way you watch something you built and love and have worried about, now standing on its own. He said two things. "You've made me very proud." And then, after a long pause, softer, meant only for her, "Your mother would be proud too." Elara blinked once, just once. Then she nodded. This story teaches us three things worth carrying with you. First, the people who work quietly and ask for nothing are often the ones holding everything together. Next time you interact with someone in a service role, the woman refilling your coffee at the diner on Route 9, the young man bagging your groceries at Kroger, look them in the eye, say thank you, and mean it. Not as a pleasantry, as a practice. Do it every single time, and notice how it changes the room. Second, cruelty that goes unchallenged does not stay small. It grows. If you have ever swallowed something unjust because speaking up felt too costly, write it down tonight in whatever notebook is nearest. Not to dwell on it, to name it. There is real power in simply refusing to let an unkindness go unacknowledged, even privately, even just between you and the page. Third, your quiet years, the ones spent raising children, tending a home, standing beside a husband through hard seasons, showing up without applause. Those years were not invisible. They were preparation. Elara's strength did not come from her title. It came from everything she had already survived before she ever walked through that door. That kind of strength belongs to you too. If this story reminded you of someone you love, or of your own quiet courage in a difficult moment, share it with a friend who needs to hear it today.